what I'd like to do is actually speak for just a little bit and then get into Q&A, which is the most fun. And I'll start by saying we're living during extraordinary times, made more extraordinary by what's going on with COVID-19. I talk to the notion that the world is moving at extraordinary speeds and accelerating. And the fact is that the future is faster than we can possibly imagine. And a lot of people fear the future. We fear what we don't understand. And we fear that the world is going to change in a way that's not recognizable. And the reality is that it will. And it's not going to be recognizable. But the world we're in today is not recognizable to our great-grandparents and to the people before them. Our job is to use the extraordinary tools that we have access to now, the extraordinary tools that enable us to be godlike with a small g, to be omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, to be able to go and find the world's biggest problems and solve the world's biggest problems. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is we are all so empowered to do amazing things. There's more capital than any time ever in human history. There's more access to knowledge and communications and manufacturing capability and design capability. And so the challenge and sort of the message I want to get out there is stop complaining and start solving, because that's what is now possible. We're living in a world where there is no problem we cannot solve. It may be difficult, may be hard, but we have access to enough capital, enough technology, and enough people to actually take on any problem, any challenge. So I think about the world changing, and I want to give an analogy that I'll come back to a few times, that some 65 million years ago, this asteroid comes and pummels the Earth, and it changes the environment so fast, so dramatically. There's this massive change that all of the slow, lumbering dinosaurs go extinct. They're gone, they're goners. They cannot adapt to the rate of change of the environment. And these furry little mammals that are scurrying along back 65 million years ago eventually evolved to become us, the dominant species on this planet. And it was really because of agility that they had that enabled that. Over the last 20 years or so, there has been yet another asteroid strike. And that asteroid strike has been exponential technologies, computation, sensors, networks, AI, robotics, 3D printing, synthetic biology, augmented virtual reality, blockchain. All these technologies are changing the world in such a rapid fashion that unless you have some level of agility, a lot of companies are going extinct. So you look at all of the major retail stores and a whole slew of other companies that can't keep up with that. And just when people are feeling safe, boom, here comes COVID-19. And that changes the world in an extraordinary fashion, in a way that, again, a lot of companies and individuals and even governments are unable to adapt rapidly enough. And so if I had to say what is the most important asset that we need as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as good humans, is adaptability, because the world is going to change. Other thing that we need is the ability to take the tools that we are being given and to use those tools for the force of good. So what do I mean by that? Well, we're heading into a world where there's more computing power in my Aura ring than there was on the command module of the Apollo mission taking us to the moon, where computation is going to be embedded in everything, everywhere, where AI is going to become embedded in everything and everywhere. And I think that scares some people, but the reality is what that's going to enable is the ability to democratize health and democratize education. So I just had a chance to write a book called The Future is Faster Than You Think. Thank you for going to the library to get that. Robert, I didn't realize people go to libraries still, but I think it's a good thing. I guess I go there for peace and quiet once in a while. But one of the things I realize is that we humans like stability. We like things to be the way they are and the way they were, and we feel uncomfortable when it changes. But you know what? The way it was sucks for most people. It really does. For most people around the planet, having the world the way it was 10, 20, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, meant that you worked at the bottom of the pyramid and you were basically serving these stacks up to the king and the queen, up to the pharaoh, up to the wealthiest people in the universe. So where we are right now is the technologies that I write about, that I invest in, that come out of the X Prizes, that come out of Singularity University's companies, that come out of a lot of the companies, all of these exponential technologies are all about democratization. They're all about literally enabling every single human on the planet to have access to all the food, energy, water, healthcare, education, entertainment, knowledge, communications that they want and that they need. And that's extraordinary. So when people fear, if we could mute on whatever channels we're not muted on, that'd be great. When people fear technology, and when they say, slow down, I don't want that technology, what you're doing is effectively fearing and slowing down the ability to bring abundance to every human on the planet. There is a future, and it's the one I work towards, it's the one that X Prize and Singularity and Abundance works towards, a future in which we can meet the needs of every man, woman, and child. To slow that down, what it means is that every child born on the planet should have the ability to get the best education possible, period. Every child born on the planet should have access to the best healthcare on the planet, period. Access to all the knowledge, communication skills, access to fulfill their dreams. You know, the two industries that are most baroque and most broken is healthcare and education by a long shot. And right now, you know, ashamedly in the United States, we spend more money per capita in those two areas and get the least results anywhere. And so I think about this, and it's not going to be, you know, unfortunately, spending more dollars on medical school educations or spending more dollars, though I think teachers are probably the most underpaid profession in the States. Ultimately, for us to get to scale, for us to be able to allow every man, woman, and child to have access to what they need, it really is going to be flowing in the impact of these technologies. So again, let's take healthcare as an example. Today, we don't have healthcare. We have sick care. We have a system that takes care of you after you're an identified patient with a disease, and it is giving you the pharmaceuticals to take care of you, putting you into an ICU or some kind of a hospital system that is expensive and that is, you know, impersonal at best and is scary. And by the way, nosocomial diseases, those are diseases brought on by being in a hospital or from a healthcare worker. I think the number is, you know, killed 250,000 people in the last year. It's more than, you know, COVID-19 by like a factor of 2 or 3. So this is error, or being in a environment that's filled with germs. What if instead of waiting for you to get sick, we were able to have our bodies constantly monitored and measured by sensors that we consume, that's under our skin, that we wear, whatever it is, that our body is being measured. So, you know, I'm a pilot, I love flying. I have a Model S car that I love from Tesla. And at the end of the day, and by the way, this is a Telluride hat, not a Tesla hat, for those of you curious. At the end of the day, those vehicles, my car and my airplane, have more sensors in them than any human does. And I know before I take off that the airplane is in perfect condition, that everything is working great before I, you know, head off into the wild blue yonder. And ultimately, that's the way that we need to be as well. We need to be monitored 24/7, all of that data going to our personal AI, our version of Jarvis, who's making sure everything is perfect in our bodies. And if it's not, we should want to know immediately so we can solve it. We can solve it by eating the right foods. We can solve it by getting the right amount of sunshine or whatever it might be. And sometimes it might be medicines as well. But the medicines we have access to now are extraordinary. There's an entire generation of what we call biologics, which are sort of B cell grown antibodies. We have access to gene therapies. If you're unfortunate in having been dosed, 3.2 billion letters of your genome, but having one of the genes be defective, and this is called genetic disease. There's a large amount of it out in the world that has survived through evolution. You can finally think about fixing that. You can finally thinking about editing that genome through CRISPR technology or replacing that gene with gene therapy. And both of these are miracles. They're fundamental miracles that are now possible. And we're going to start to see the concept going from, oh, I'm so sorry you have that disease, to why aren't you fixing that disease? Just like if you were going down the road with a flat tire on your car, why aren't you pulling over and fixing it? The notion that we should say that's just the way it is only is true if you don't have the way to fix it. And I think we're heading towards the technologies. Again, this is the combination of quantum computing, AI, and CRISPR and gene therapy and a range of other technologies, enabling us to understand how the body was ideally meant to work. Let me slow that down again. And some people say, well, I don't know about this stuff. I don't think we should be fixing this. And, I'm a big believer in longevity. I'm focused on making 100 years old and you 60, and then making 120 years old and you 60, and then 200 years old and you 60. I'm like, I love this life and I love living on this planet. I want to live here as long as I possibly can. Just my personal bias. Everybody, it's up to you how long you want to go. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that our bodies were never designed to live past age 30. Back 100,000 years ago, a million years ago, you'd go into puberty at age 13, maybe age 12. And by the time you were 26, your baby was having a baby. And if that was a situation, well then, if you had grandparents around who were 30 or 40 years old and you were taking food from your grandchildren's mouths, that was not the best way to perpetuate your species. So what happened? We would die by age 30. 30 was, you were done. You had reproduced, you'd passed on your genes, you were the best contribution you could make to your species. And so we were never designed as humans to live past age 30. So just think, if you're over 30, all the years you've gotten for free. But the body began to dysregulate. All of the genes that had been turned on start getting turned off, and the genes that were off start getting turned on. And it's a whole slew. And there's an amazing book by Dr. David Sinclair called Lifespan that I commend to you, that talks about the sirtuin systems and DNA repair systems and the value of NAD plus and NMN and a whole slew of things I won't go into here. But Lifespan is an amazing book, one of my favorite books of the year. So we have the ability finally to add healthy years, not years in a wheelchair, not years in pain, healthy years in people's lives. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So we're going to reinvent healthcare to make it true healthcare, not sick care. Education today is, again, just a travesty for most. And I feel sorry for the kids going through school right now on Zoom rooms, which is the best people are trying to do, but it's a very difficult situation. I know it from it personally with 2 9-year-olds. But we're going to reinvent that, right? It's going to be the combination of a whole slew of different technologies. And you may say, well, I don't want my kid on tech. I want my kid getting, education from teachers and so forth. Listen, a lot of parts of the world don't have that luxury. And our ability to democratize and demonetize the best education, where eventually I can take a child in the middle of any place, put them on a pair of VR glasses and say, I want to teach you about ancient Greece. And you say, okay. So you put on your glasses and you go back and you're in VR, and everything in the VR screen that you see is super high resolution. It looks lifelike. It's at, you know, a resolution that your visual cortex of your brain cannot distinguish from the real world. And we're not far from that. And God knows that the GPUs, the graphical process units coming from NVIDIA and from lots of different companies are getting us to a point. Why? Because of gaming. Gaming is driving photorealistic visual experiences that are off the charts amazing. And so imagine that instead, when I put on my VR goggles and I look over there, I'm in ancient Greece, there's a slab of marble, there's a guy in a white toga, and he says, "Hi, I'm Plato, come on over, let's talk." And you walk over to this virtual version of Plato and you have a conversation. And he says, "Come on, walk with me and I'll show you where I live. I'll introduce you to my friends. I'll tell you what I've been thinking about." And you have this experience, and that virtual version of Plato is an AI. It's an AI and neural net that's been trained by all of the writings of Plato and Aristotle and all the historians. And that AI is as accurate as could be. And you have a one-on-one relationship with that virtual version of Plato, and it's extraordinary. And you remember that. You remember experiences rather than read about him in a book or read about, you know, or see a TV movie. To go and live a day in ancient Greece or ancient Rome or on the savannas of Africa, or wherever you want to go, what an extraordinary experience that will be. That's going to become education, to go and learn and live and be with anyone. So, all right, so we've covered healthcare, we've covered education. You know, there's so many other fields that are going to be transforming. I'm a space cadet. I grew up passionate about space. You know, for me, it was the Apollo program and that scientific documentary called Star Trek that got me going. That was like, you know, it was like, this is the way the future is. This is the way the future is going to be. It's taken us a good 30 years to get here, but we're finally almost there, given what Elon's done with SpaceX and hopefully what Blue Origin will do through the $1 billion a year that Jeff Bezos is spending there. But we're heading towards a world in which in the next 10 to 20 years, we are going to become irreversibly a multi-planet species, a multi-planetary species. So whatever we evolve into 1,000,000 years from now, even 1,000 years from now, we're going to look back at these next couple of decades as the moment in time that the human race moved off the planet irreversibly. And so that's going to be extraordinary. And, you know, when I think about what is that going to enable, it's going to enable for us to experiment with virtual governments, to decide how do we want to live. One of my mentors, who is a professor at Princeton, a guy named Gerard K. O'Neill, had proposed the idea of these large O'Neill colonies. And these would be colonies of about 1 million people each. And these would not be on the surface of the moon or the surface of Mars. These would be free floating in space. They'd be large rotating cylinders, about 1 kilometer in diameter around a rotating axis. And they'd be built from either lunar material or from asteroidal material, but they'd house 1 million people. And you'd live on the inside this rotating sphere. And, you know, centripetal acceleration, omega squared r, would keep you on the inside at 1g. And the beautiful thing is you'd grow with a population of 1 million people, a nice small town in Colorado, wherever the case might be. And if you ended up having differences of opinion, if you ended up having a group of people who said, we don't agree with the policies here or the policies there, well, then the colony would bud. You would build a second colony out of asteroidal material. Half people would stay, half people would go to the next location, and you would, you know, literally fill the solar system with these. And, you know, whether or not we are going to become a multi-solar species, if we develop faster than light travel, who knows? I do believe, for one thing, that we're living in a world where, or in a universe in which life is ubiquitous. I'm still waiting for them to come and grab me. So if you're listening, come on down and take me away. But you know, that's sort of what else did I want to talk about here? I'm sort of on a rambling slide here. Let's see.
Food. You're going to talk about the future of food.
Future of food. All right. Here. I can talk about future of food. All right, I'll come back to this slide afterwards. Where are we? What is food? Food is the energy from the sun entering your body. That's all food is. So if we think about it, in a fusion reactor, 93 million miles away, hydrogen becomes helium, helium becomes carbon, and down the atomic periodic table. And the energy from the sun comes to the earth in the form of photons. The earth captures like 1/1,000,000th of the energy coming from the sun, hits the surface of the earth. Some of those photons get captured by chloroplasts, by a molecule called chlorophyll, and it becomes a high energy hydrocarbon, a sugar or carbohydrate, and either you eat it or your cow or pig or whatever form of protein you want eats it. And then you eat that. That's what food is. Food is a process by which we get energy from the sun into our bodies. Now, the challenge is that as we've become the dominant species on this planet, we want healthier and higher quality foods. And as we go from a world of scarcity and a world of poverty to a world of middle class and higher class, or not higher class, but middle class and wealthy, people want higher quality protein. They want pork, they want chicken, they want beef, they want whatever they want, fish. But for us to sustain that is devastating to the environment. And we are actually a planet of livestock, not a planet of humans. And it is impossible for us to continue to provide high quality protein the way we have been providing it. And so I want you to think about something differently. What if instead of growing an entire cow or an entire chicken or entire tuna and killing it in order to eat it, what if instead you could take a few stem cells from one of those animals and take those stem cells and actually proliferate them and activate them to become muscle tissue, effectively meat? And what if you could actually grow an entire hamburger or pork chop or chicken breast from stem cells? I mean, this is, for me, one of the most interesting ideas. Now, it's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. And our ability to actually feed the entire planet with high quality food, in fact, food that is cheaper, food that is higher quality, tuna with no mercury in it, tuna that doesn't destroy our fisheries and oceans, beef that doesn't, cause us to deforest large tracts of land. I mean, this is a future that is extraordinary in a multitude of different ways. So now the challenge is, and this is something I pose to my kids: if I took, one of my stem cells and grew it into a steak, would that be cannibalism if I ate that? I'm just curious, but that's a whole different conversation that we can have at some other point. So future of food is there. I am someone, when people say I don't like, genetically modified organisms, GMOs, my response to that is, listen, GMOs have saved millions of lives and killed nobody. It is one of the most important. Our ability to live the life that we're living in today is a function of our ability to actually transform agriculture worldwide. All right. What other subjects, Robert? Anything else?
I think those are the three that you were going to talk about.
I was going to talk about brain-computer interface, actually, BCI.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so let me talk about that. So when I want to do something complicated on my phone, dictate to it, ask it difficult questions and so forth, what happens? Well, the phone does a certain amount of processing on the phone, and then it goes from my phone to the edge of the cloud, to go and actually get the answer, to do the difficult processing of the image or the voice note, whatever it might be, and bring the answer back to me. So that's interesting. But our brains don't do that. So if I want to get an answer from my brain, our brains are 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion synaptic connections. And our brains cannot get any bigger than they are right now. Why? Because the female birth canal. If the brain got any larger, it would kill your mom when you're giving birth. And that is not a good thing to do if you want to perpetuate the species. But what you could do instead is actually connect your brain to the net, to the cloud. And so we're on the verge of doing that. So Ray Kurzweil, who's my partner at Singularity University, he's the chancellor and co-founder. I was the executive founder and co-founder with him. And Ray has two predictions that I think are super cool and super relevant to keep in mind. First, that we're going to have human level AI by 2029. That's, some 9 years from now. And that second, we're going to have brain-computer interface. We're going to interface our brain at high bandwidth with the cloud by the mid-2030s. Call that 14 years from now. So what is so cool about that is our ability to think and know, be able to actually have access to the world's knowledge instantaneously. But what's even more interesting, and I write about this in the last chapter of my book, The Future's Faster Than You Think, is the notion that imagine if I'm connected to the cloud and Robert, you and my mom and anyone else here watching is connected to the cloud as well. As I connect with it, my thoughts and your thoughts and everyone's thoughts are connected in a way that is extraordinarily truthful and intimate. And it's a way of connecting 8 billion humans in a fashion never like before understood. It's a level of connection and intimacy that allows you to appreciate someone. When someone does well, if you're connected with them, that means you're doing well. If someone does poorly, it means you want to go and help them. So each of us is a collection of 30 trillion cells. There's no, just single me. It's 30 trillion me's in terms of human cells. And then there's a whole slew of additional viral, fungal, bacterial, cells that each of us have in our microbiota. And, I don't take a knife and stab my arm if it's itching because it's me. I don't want to harm myself. So imagine a world that is so intimately connected among 8 billion people that we don't want to do harm to anybody because we are all being uplifted together. That's a version I can go into in Q&A, what I call a meta-intelligence, but there's just an extraordinary world ahead, a world in which we can extend our healthy lifespans, a world in which we can be connected to individuals in a way which is extraordinary, a world in which we are opening the human species up to the stars, a world in which we can preserve environments and not destroy them selfishly for food, whatever the case might be. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, and I can spend the better part of 5 days talking about the subject. So, but let's go to some Q&A here.
Okay, so next year at Camp Mystic, we'll give you a full 5 days, Peter, and you just be on the stage talking about the future. It'll be really cool.
I do it often.
It'll be really fun.
Any subject other than sports or politics, I'm good with those.
Can I ask you a politics question that you can pass on if you like? It's about technology and voting.
Yes, go ahead.
Do you have any technological solutions or ideas for solutions to the problems around voting or it could be coronavirus voting or just voting as far as voter fraud. And then the second one is solutions regarding our current challenges around police and people of color being disproportionately.
Two simple questions. I have a yes no answer for both of those.
Right.
Just kidding. So on voting, listen, we don't live in a democracy. Let's be clear about that. We live in a representative democracy. It's the only option we had when we started this country a few hundred years ago. Today, we have the option of having an absolutely true democracy. We could have a democracy in which every person gets to vote. And in fact, the better democracy is one in which, I vote on the issues I know about. And if there's an issue on women's health, honestly, I'm looking, there's Deanna, I would hand it to her and say, you're my proxy on all women's health issues, but if there's a space issue, why don't you give it to me to vote for you on, right? So in other words, you can create a representative democracy for people that you care about, who you respect, who sign up and say, listen, I'm going to vote on all issues on the environment, all issues on energy, all issues, and you can get those people you respect to vote on your behalf. And when there's a space issue, or there's an issue on AI, I'd raise my hand and say, I care about those issues. I'm knowledgeable. If you like me, let me vote for you. So that's a version of a democracy, because none of us can truly be cognizant of all of the things. But I'm clear, there is no congressman or senator or president who knows about, a minute minority of these issues. So I could reinvent it that way. And we can live in a digital world. I trust my finances to the digital world. I trust so many things far more to the digital world than I would, trust a voting machine. So there is a way to do it. The challenge is that democracy or governments do not change gracefully. They change disruptively. They change by major revolution. And so it means toppling a system that already exists. Or there are two ways that we're going to start, and I'm not here to foment revolution, though maybe I am, who knows, but we can talk about that later. There are two ways to do this in a better fashion. One is we're going to eventually, when we get off planet, and we're going to do that very soon, the next 10, 20 years, we're going to start to see people living on the moon and on Mars and on colonies. We'll start to move a significant portion of individuals in that fashion. And hopefully they're not going to bring an existing form of government with them. They're going to start with tabula rasa and do a hell of a better job than exists right now. But the second place that's going to be interesting is going to be in the virtual world. We're getting there slowly, but right now, what this represents is the potential for me to have, yes, I'm a US citizen, but I'm going to have additional citizenships in other worlds. And just like Philip Rosedale, a dear friend, came up with early on in Second Life, is I'll spend my daytime hours here, but at nighttime, we're going to get there soon with super high resolution VR, especially with brain computer interface as it comes online, is I'm going to live my true self, my burner self, in a virtual world. And in that world, we're going to have an amazing democracy. We're going to pick the rules that we want. And if people don't agree with that, the world can split. We can vote on it. Everyone who wants to go with those set of rules, you go there. These set of rules, we go there. Or we sit and fight it out until we have actually set of rules. So the true evolution of government is going to occur in the virtual worlds that we're going to be creating in the years ahead, not too far from now. So that's the first thing. Okay, the second thing on the much more important and touchier issue of rights and prejudice and such is I'm giving a talk to the MIT Club in a couple of weeks on this exact subject. And I want to give the human race some credit, and I want to project where we're going. I want to contextualize where we've been. For most of human existence, we have been the king and the queen on the hilltop and everybody else in slavery, right? I mean, just please understand that. It was the pharaoh and whatever, what's the female version? I don't know. Empress, whatever. And everybody else, in some level of destitution and slaves. So it was the entire populace working to support the needs of a few at the very top. That was reality. That's the world we lived in. And we've been moving slowly away from that, where each of us have a set of rights, not equal around the planet, some colored by where we live, and some by the color of our skin, and some where we were born, and some by the language we speak, and some by the religion we believe in. But better than it was 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago. And this is moving in the direction of a democratization. What I mean by that is that we're heading towards a world where every man, woman, and child can have access to all the information, all the communications. Energy will effectively become, the poorest countries in the world are the sunniest countries in the world. And as we move towards an all solar economy, we're going to have, most of Africa, most of Asia, South and Central America be the energy richest countries in the planet, which is amazing. You have abundant energy, you have abundant clean water from desal, pulling water out of the atmosphere. And then if you have abundant clean water, half the disease burden on planet Earth, half the diseases are due to unclean drinking water. So all of these dominoes begin to topple in an extraordinary fashion. So what I come back to, so from the issues of the racial injustice and unrest that we've had, partly comes from the glimpse and the knowledge that we can have a level of equality. And I want to just say that this level of equality is going to be accelerated and made stronger and more capable by these exponential technologies, where the cost of the best healthcare and the best education will effectively be zero, independent of where you live, independent of what you do, who your parents were, what religion you have. And I just want to be, if everybody, if we're having access to all these extraordinary capabilities and we're not battling for, my child is sick, where can I take them? Or my child wants to learn something, where can she go? That alone has got massive equalization capabilities. And ultimately, we have to solve systemically the challenges we have. But if people are focused on taking care of their kids and their basic needs, they don't have the energy or the time to stand up for their basic rights. So I just want to show that directionality and that hope, because it's important for, I think, people to see the value that technology has. And I don't want to be, a techno-utopian on this, but these are tools that are important for us to recognize the value they have in society. End of rant.
Thank you. Those are great solutions. I think you're so right about looking at our history. I've been studying a lot of Roman history recently. Almost like one Roman senator said, we should put uniforms on all the slaves so that we know who the slaves are. And that didn't get passed because they said there are more slaves in Rome than there are Roman citizens. If they all had a tag that said, I'm a slave, or they all had a shirt, there would be a revolt like immediately. And so the understanding that unfortunately this great discrepancy has existed throughout human history is really important to understand what has brought us here today. There's a question on, so you mentioned putting on a VR headset for education and talking to people from history. If you could choose, let's say 3 people from history, who would you want students to meet from history, and why?
God, I suck at that answer. I really do. Just to be clear, really bad at that answer.
Well, then give us 1 or 5, whichever one's going to be easier.
Oh my goodness. So I love areas of exploration. I love, for me, going back and meeting the great explorers. I mean, like, what the hell was Columbus thinking when he headed west? That was incredible. Or just the fathers of this country. What were they? I enjoyed watching the play Hamilton, and the point is made when George Washington steps down, instead of being a monarch, being, to saying, we're going to change teach everybody to change. Just those moments of the birth of a nation for me, and going back to those days, those moments versus the individuals, those moments in time. I think that's those are areas of interest for me, and and of course the great physicists of our time. I'll leave it at that. Let's get some more. Let's get some less Peter-centric questions.
We had a question about kind of the food of the future. What should we be looking for? And so, in your book, you talk about how kind of food grown in a laboratory went from, I'm making up the numbers here, but I think I got the idea right. It was, $10,000 a pound for meat grown 10 years ago in a lab. And now it's down to $10 a pound or $50 a pound. It's reducing dramatically. And soon it'll be cheaper to grow meat in the lab, grow protein in the laboratory than it will be to graze the animals on land. So that's one thing to look for. But what should we, if we want to be healthy and we want to be environmentally sustainable, what should we be looking for in the food industry?
Yeah, so first of all, I went vegan about, I don't know, I was pescatarian for the longest time. I went vegan probably about 9 months ago, just for health purposes, and I've enjoyed it and found it amazingly easy to do, right? So there's no question that if you're looking at your health metrics, a vegan diet is going to add years to your life, and it's just, the science is really strong across the board, independent of what my mom says. Mom, I'm sorry, I love you, but you're a great cook. I'll make exceptions on a basis here and there. All right, but now the question becomes, when we're eating food, you're eating all of the molecular makeup, the vitamins and so forth. It is possible to know what's in that food. And unfortunately, a lot of the food products we eat today, because we're trying desperately to feed a population of 8 billion people, is a lot of the food is driven by chemicals, pesticides, hormones, and so forth. So we're going to be able to actually understand what is in the food and what is the healthiest food to eat. I would love to be living in a place where every morning my robots go out, that they pluck the vegetables and the fruits and they wash it. I'm not going to have the workforce do that, and they feed me something straight off the farm. That would be great. Before that, I'd like to at least know that the food is the freshest possible. One of the areas that we can look at is local farming and vertical farming. So today, the food that we eat, the average meal that you sit down and have at a restaurant has I think it's like 1,500 food miles, meaning the wine comes from France, the beef comes from Texas or Argentina, the broccoli comes from here, and so forth. It isn't made, I live in Santa Monica, California, it wasn't made downtown here or wherever you might be. The food had to travel a long distance, and while it's traveling, it's losing a lot of its vitamins. And by the way, half the cost of the meal is travel miles, is petrol dollars for moving the food around. What if instead the food could be manufactured locally? So Kimball Musk has been doing that with part of his work, and he's supporting, but we're heading towards a world where we can utilize sensors and better better systems to actually grow food in a 24/7 cycle at just the perfect frequency of light, at just the perfect micronutrients in 3D structures. And so manufacture food that is not 1,500 food miles from you, but 10 food miles, and it's literally what do you call it, plucked that morning. That is a possibility as well. So not just in terms of the protein, but how do you get your vegetables and fruits from local sources?
And so what do you think we're going to be starting to be seeing soon? Do you think we're going to start to see inexpensive, fake meat is plant-based meat, or inexpensive meat grown in a laboratory? Or is it going to be inexpensive fresh food all the time, or is it less pesticides on our food? What changes should we be looking for?
So here's the challenge. All of this stuff in the beginning is expensive. And I want to just bring people back. It will eventually become cheaper because from first principle thinking, it's a cheaper way to do it, and it's a healthier way to do it, and it benefits everybody. But in the beginning, it's expensive. So if you bring back to the notion of the cell phone, right? The cell phone, that there are more of these devices on the planet than there are humans. And the poorest people in the favelas in Brazil, I was in Brazil back 2 weeks ago for one of my companies, Kovacs. The poorest kids all have a cell phone. But if you go back to when the first cell phones came online in the mid 1980s, into the early 1990s, the first cell phones cost $1 million, and they would drop a call every 2 blocks, and they were the size of a briefcase. And so when the shit does not work well, it's expensive and it's only available to the richest people. And then when it finally works great and it's cheap, it's available to everybody. And it's going to be the same thing with all of these products, our food products. So I think we're going to see food manufactured locally. I think we're seeing, Beyond Meat. We've got incredible, sort of plant-based meat lookalikes that I happen to enjoy tremendously. But the stem cell grown meats, we're getting ready. So I run an organization, I don't run it, I'm now executive chairman. An amazing woman named Anusha Ansari runs it, the X Prize Foundation. And we're getting ready to launch a very large X Prize for feeding the next billion people. And it's an X Prize that's coming out of Abu Dhabi with backing from a number of individuals, including Tony Robbins. And it's how do you take, in particular, chicken and fish to huge quantities of safe stem cell grown meat products. So, we're going to start to see this stuff come on market and begin to accelerate. Are we still 10 years away from this being available every place? Probably, but it's within sight.
It's beautiful. I love your perspective on the cell phone. The idea that the poorest people today have access to a cell phone, which gives them the power to listen to music written by geniuses, performed by people who spent their entire life learning to play the violin. You can listen to that for free anytime, anywhere. And 200 years ago, we only had chamber music that you could listen to in your home. It's amazing what quote poor is today. It's being one of the richest people in the history of our planet.
We forget. Yeah.
And so as the singularity approaches, and life extension is increasing, a lot of people are concerned about their brains and their brain health. If you reach 80 years old today, there's a 50-50 chance you'll get Alzheimer's or dementia. And so people really want to protect their brains. And there's thoughts that, hey, if my brain's healthy, but maybe my body isn't, I can merge with the singularity, or I can at least, I'll get a new body when that happens and so forth. So what are things that people can do to protect their brain? And if you want to share any of your personal health practices regarding brain health and optimizing your brain, that would be terrific.
Sure, happily. So first of all, let's define what the singularity is. Singularity is a notion that was put forward by a science fiction author first, and then Ray Kurzweil popularized it in his book, The Singularity is Near. So we can predict the reasonable near future. We can predict what's going to be happening in roughly 5 to 10 years. When people say, what's it going to be like in 20 years? I'm like, oh, can't do that, sorry. And when I get asked to speak about, the world 50 years from now, I'm like, no way. There's like zero way of making any prediction there. What's going to happen 50 years from now? And that prediction time horizon is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And what we're seeing is that converging exponential technologies, which means not one, not two, 3, 4, 5 technologies coming together, are reinventing every industry. And there is a moment in time where your ability to predict what happens next, like 5 minutes from now, disappears. And that is a moment called the singularity. If we truly have human level AI that is is able to reinvent itself and make itself faster and faster and faster, and you combine the 3 basic elements are sort of bio, info, nano. So biotechnology, this is what we are. We are wet machines of ribosomes and DNA and Golgi apparatus and the plasma reticulum and cellular and nuclear membranes. We are biological machines in that regard. So bio is one big area of technology. CRISPR and gene therapy is what's happening there with great speed and progress. Info is AI, it's computational, it's quantum computing, it's AI, that whole realm. And then nanotechnology is the ability to effectively manipulate atom by atom Richard Feynman was the first person to really write about this in the late 50s, and then K. Eric Drexler, who I had the pleasure to spend time with learning at MIT, wrote about it in Engines of Creation. And it's the notion that there is a point in time in which I can have what he calls an assembler. An assembler is a device that can pull atoms together and create them in any way, shape, or form. So if I have a nanobot in my hand, I can say, replicate yourself, grab atoms out of my skin and replicate yourself, 50 times and give one of these nanobots to everyone listening. And now you each have a nanobot. And with one of those nanobots, you can toss it into the ground and you can say, hey, build me a electric Lamborghini. And the nanobots take the atoms out of the ground and reorganize them. And then they say, I need some titanium or some lithium, and you add whatever it needs, and it builds you that electric Lamborghini from an all open information set and from the energy from the sun, right? So everything eventually becomes the cost of information, energy, and raw materials. These are sort of the asymptotes that we're moving towards. So the singularity is a future in which that rate of change is so fast, it's not predictable. And the question becomes, okay, is it gonna happen? Am I gonna be part of it? Is that scary? So the reality is that we as humans are undergoing evolution. We have been. We've been evolving on this planet for, on the order of the start of life was probably 500 million years after the Earth formed, about 4 billion years ago. But we're going from evolution by natural selection, which is Darwinism, right, to evolution by human direction. We're beginning to evolve ourselves. And we're beginning to evolve ourselves by the use of machines like CRISPR and gene therapy. But the next level of evolution is when we start connecting our brains with the cloud. I'll give you the analogy that I use, and I'm usually just talking about this after a few tequilas, but I'll try it now after a cup of coffee instead.
So is that the brain boosting drug you take? It's not aniracetam, it's not lion's mane, it's tequila. That's the
No, just stuck on the subject. I can give you my chemical formulas in the morning. All right. So life began on this planet as a very simple organism called a prokaryote. A prokaryote was a bag of cytoplasm, free-floating cytoplasm with some free-floating DNA, and it was the simplest life form that existed. And as it evolved, it went from what's called prokaryotes to eukaryotes. What are eukaryotes? They were still single-cell life forms, but inside this single-cell life form, they had incorporated technology. What technology? Well, incorporated mitochondria, and these were probably single-cell life forms that got incorporated into them. And they were able to manipulate energy more efficiently. So the mitochondria were the technology enabling these simple cell life forms to use oxygen, to create more energy, to move around faster. They incorporated nuclear membranes and chromatin and chromosome structures to manipulate information. And so we went from prokaryotes to eukaryotes over the course of 1 billion years. And that analogy of those simple life forms incorporating technology into them is what we're doing right now. We're incorporating this kind of technology into our bodies. So I have an Oura Ring, an Apple Watch. I have a small little RFID chip that I inserted into my hand a couple of years back just for fun. We can talk about this some other time. The second step that life took in the next 1 billion years was going from eukaryotic cells to multicellular life forms. So these cells that incorporate technology into them became multicellular life forms, 100 cells, 1,000 cells, 1,000,000 cells, 1,000,000,000 cells. You and me, 30 trillion cells. And it was those multi-cell life forms collaborating together that allowed us to step out of the muck onto the land and eventually into the stars. And so we're doing the same thing as humans. we're the equivalent today of prokaryotic cells, simple life forms. We're incorporating technology into our beings, whether we like it or not. Every one of us right here is using technology to communicate, and we're becoming, by virtue of this meta intelligence, all of us together are smarter together, right? We're not connected at an intimate level yet, brain to brain, but we're connected around an idea. We're connected in space and time around a conversation. And so we're going to start to become this meta intelligence. And it's at that point that I believe we're going to become sort of birthed to a new level, a new level of evolution. So when I think about this, the singularity, I think, yes, it's important to be alive, to be part of that, and to be in a reasonably good brain health. I think the most important element in the universe is passion and love and curiosity, right? So it comes down to passion, love, and curiosity. Are you passionate about what you're doing in life? Do you love? And are you curious? So I'll leave it at that.
Wow, the most important element in life is passion, love, and curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. You know, in Daniel Goleman's research, he talks about how loneliness is the greatest threat to health. It's not cigarette smoking, but people who are lonely did better than the smoke, or did worse than the smokers, and like, you know, who got sick. And so you're so right. Without love and without passion, without being interested in something, you know, we shrivel up and die. Peter, if you were the average American, and I'm going to make some really gross generalizations, let's say you're 35, you're overweight, you might be pre-diabetic, and maybe you only have $600 in the bank account. What would you do to prepare for the future?
Fall in love, be curious, and find out you're passionate about. So listen, at the end of the day, I mean, I believe in that as well, but at the end of the day, what's also fundamentally critical is just to read, to learn. We're living in a time where you can learn about anything you want, anytime you want, anywhere you want. And so, I mean, one of the things I've been building is a product called Future Loop, along with Evan Pagan, that some of you may know, and Morgan McDermott. We've been building an AI program called Future Loop. It's free. Go to futureloop.com to get information about it. And it's a means by which we scan the world's information for positive, future-forward news about topics you're passionate about. So here's one of the biggest diseases out there. One of the biggest challenges and problems we have is we're living in a world of dystopian information. And I talk to my mom about this all the time. Turn off the goddamn news, Mom. Turn off CNN, turn off Fox, stop watching it. It is poison, right? So it's like our brains are neural nets. Our brains are shaped by what we let into our brains. If you're letting in constant information about all the negative news going on, every murder, every problem, every challenge on the planet, you're going to wake up in just crisis mode every day. And yeah, there's lots of negative stuff going on, but the news media, and I jokingly, you know, and I say this to the face of my friends at CNN, it's a crisis news network. It's a constantly negative news network, whatever you want to call CNN. I have a few versions of that for Fox as well, but nothing I could say publicly. So, you know, at the end of the day, the news that's important to you, use filters to bring it to you, whether it's Google News or Apple News or Future Loop or whatever the case might be. But it's news that is relevant to you, that you actually love and are curious about. But I do that like for 10 minutes a day, not for an hour or 2 hours a day, because our brains are, you know, how you shape your brain. We learn a lot about algorithms, neural nets, and like when you're shaping a neural net for an AI, if you show it just cats, right? You show it images of cats, and then you showed an image of a dog, it says, oh, that's a cat. That's all it's learned. You've shaped the neural net to look for cats. And so if you are constantly in negative abusive relationships, or watching negative news, and are always in a negative environment, and the people you're hanging out with are negative, et cetera, how can you possibly have a positive outlook in life? Right? The old saying is, if you're overweight and you want to be thin, hang out with thin people. If you're weak and you want to be strong, hang out with people who are in good health. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So, ultimately, I think we can shape our lives by virtue of who and where and how our environment helps shape us. I forget what the question was, but that was my answer.
Thank you so much. We're almost at time. I'd love to give CK a chance to ask you a question, and then we have Rick Doblin. I wanted to ask you a question about psychedelics while Rick Doblin is
Sure,
on
happily.
the call. I feel like that's a unique opportunity. So CK,
Happily.
let me see if I can raise your hand here. Let me. Can I unmute you, CK?
Yeah, CK.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate you. So as a visionary who have started Singularity University, all these beautiful forward-looking organizations, you share with us 2 strategies that you have in terms of consuming good news, following interesting technologies. What are some of the other ways that you use as a way to peer into the future, really concretize that vision? Because you coined the term visioneering, right? So how are you concretizing what that future look like as far as possible?
CK, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I would say one of the most important things is what is possible from first principle thinking. Just because something isn't that way, and just because it doesn't exist, doesn't mean it can't. It just means that one has to create a vision of what is possible in the future. And I've had these conversations with some of the greatest entrepreneurs in the world who go back and look at what is possible. So when Elon Musk looked at building Tesla, he was looking at from energy density standpoint, energy density, and from a cost of lithium-ion batteries, what is possible. Now, he turns out he fooled himself miserably when he started Tesla, because he was basing on existing batteries in the Lotus Esprit body. But he said he would never have gotten into it if those things hadn't existed. But when he was halfway into it, he had to reinvent everything. But from first principle thinking, this is possible. So we're living in a world where the way things are have been shaped because of the industrial military complex or the governmental structures. Remember, the people who are in power shape the world to keep the way the world is today because it's what serves them. But what could be the world in the future? And how do you get us there? And sometimes it's sneakily, sometimes it's deceptively, sometimes it's just creating something that's 10 times better, so people have no other way than to change the rules or change over or reinvent what's possible. But I'm clear that there is no problem we can't solve, and I'm clear that we can reinvent the fundamentals. Right? Food, water, energy, healthcare, education, entertainment, all of these things can be massively, I call them the 6 Ds of exponential. Whatever you digitize, the early days is deceptive, then it becomes disruptive, then it demonetizes, democratizes, and ultimately demonetizes, democratizes, and dematerializes our products and services. So Rick, good to see you. Nice handover.
Peter, yes, thank you.
Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and be with us here at Virtual Camp Mystic and Virtual Burning Man. So based upon your experiences in life and your wisdom, what do you think the future of psychedelics is like? They're becoming legal in place. They're almost legal in Denver. People like Rick have pioneered the science and the research behind this. Just based on a scientific perspective, what do you think the future is of psychedelics in both creativity as well as growing new brain cells to help prevent dementia?
I thought you were going to say growing hair, but that's a different matter.
I could use that help. I'm getting close there. So you got that. I'd love that.
So listen, I'm a huge fan and believer of the use of psychedelics from a self-growth perspective. I think that the potential for good is orders and orders of magnitude compared to other drugs that have been legalized before. I'm super excited about for the work that you've been doing, Rick. I've had some of the most transformative moments of truly understanding the force of love in the universe from use of various medicines, and a huge fan and supporter. So at the end of the day, again, the world has viscosity, which means that change sometimes is slow. And what viscosity means, if you stop pushing, the world stops you. And ultimately, it means we need to push for the things that we love and we believe in most, right? Finding your passion, finding your purpose, what we call a massively transformative purpose. When you have that, and it's no longer work, it's joy, it's purpose in life, then you keep going. And you know this, Rick. I mean, many of us know this. A lot of the work we do is overnight successes after a decade or two of hard work. Yeah. So.
Or 4 or 5 decades.
Or in your case, 4 or 5 decades. Yes. I wasn't going to put you there.
Peter, thank you so much. Deep gratitude to you, and for sharing your time with us, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your vision of the future, and for the work that you're doing in the world to democratize not only information, but technology to lift up the lives of everyone on the planet.
A pleasure, a pleasure. And over to new technology, over to Rick. Robert, thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter.
I'll go off camera here. Thank you, guys.